A farmer refused a fortune for his mule, then lost it, and his son broke a leg while taming a beast. But these two misfortunes saved his son's life from a deadly war. This is proof that absolutely everything has a purpose, and what seems like a curse can ultimately become a blessing. Many years ago, in a fertile valley surrounded by mountains and crystal-clear rivers, there was a small farming village. There, near that village, on his farm, lived Arthur, a humble man about 45 years old, with a face weathered by the sun and hands hardened by the earth. Arthur wasn't rich. He barely had enough to keep food on his table, but unlike many in the village, he always had a serene smile, as if nothing worried him too much. People said he was poor, but he felt blessed. His family was small. His only son, Lucas, a strong young man full of dreams, and a very special animal that had become part of the family. A black mule with an imposing physique and lively eyes, whom they called Blackie. Blackie was no ordinary animal. In his dark gaze, there was a different shine, as if he carried wisdom in his eyes. His black coat gleamed under the sun, and his majestic bearing meant that, even unintentionally, he stole the attention of anyone who saw him pass. He was as strong as the earth itself, tireless on the longest journeys, yet noble and docile with those who treated him with respect. But what was most astonishing was not just his strength, but his intelligence. There was something about Blackie that made him different. He seemed to understand the words of Arthur and Lucas even before they were spoken. With a simple gesture of the hand, with a firm look, the animal obeyed, as if a secret language existed between the two that no one else could decipher. Lucas had grown up by his side since childhood, had learned to ride on his back, and often on quiet afternoons, he would lie on his coat, quietly telling him his dreams, as if Blackie could keep them in silence. Therefore, for father and son, Blackie was not just a work animal. He was a companion and a family member. For this family, Blackie was priceless. It wasn't about money, work, or convenience. Blackie represented unity, effort, and gratitude. He was a living reminder that true wealth is not always measured in coins, but in the companionship that sustains the soul when life becomes difficult. Over time, the mule's fame spread throughout the region, until one day a wealthy rancher from another area arrived in the village, having heard of Blackie's reputation. He rode a fine horse and wore elegant clothes that contrasted with the simplicity of the village's farmers. The villagers' murmurs soon filled the air. Everyone knew that the visit of a man with so much money was no coincidence. The rancher had come with a single purpose: to see the mule everyone was talking about with his own eyes, and to buy him. As soon as he dismounted, he asked a peasant where the animal's owner lived. The man, pointing towards the small village square, replied, "I saw Arthur there with the mule a few minutes ago. You'll probably still find him." Without wasting time, the rich rancher headed to the square, and there were Arthur and Blackie. The humble farmer was buying some simple provisions before returning to his farm. The contrast was evident. The man's simplicity and the mule's imposing presence, who seemed to guard him like a loyal protector. It was then that the rancher saw him up close and couldn't contain his amazement. When he saw the mule, the man was impressed. He had never seen such a strong and well-cared-for animal. "That mule is worth gold," he said with admiration. And when he finally faced him, he didn't hold back his words. Then, in front of everyone present, he offered Arthur a large sum of money to buy him. It was so much that with that amount, Arthur could have stopped working for years. The crowd fell silent, awaiting the answer, but to everyone's surprise, Arthur smiled calmly and said, "Sir, I appreciate your generosity, but this mule is not for sale. Blackie is part of our life. I couldn't trade him for money." The murmurs quickly followed. Some villagers said, "This old man is crazy, rejecting so much money for a simple animal." Others added, "He's a fool. He'll stay poor until he dies." But Arthur, as serene as ever, continued his life. One morning, just as the roosters began to crow, Lucas went to the stable to look for Blackie to go work in the fields and discovered he wasn't there. His heart raced. He called his name again and again, but the mule had disappeared. He ran to the field, checked the fences, searched the dirt roads, but nothing. The animal's absence filled the air with a heavy silence. Lucas searched the entire farm until he reached the borders with neighboring farms. He spent the whole day asking, checking pastures, even following tracks that faded between the mud and the grass. But when night fell, exhausted and with a troubled soul, he returned without any answer. Lucas, his eyes full of frustration, asked his father, "Dad, how can you be so calm? We lost the most valuable thing we had." Arthur, in a serene voice, replied, "Son, don't rush your heart. Don't say it's good or bad so quickly. Time will show what this loss means." Lucas, in silence, didn't understand. The following dawn, still holding on to hope, father and son went to the village, trusting that someone might have seen the black mule. They asked in the square, in the store, on the dusty streets, but the answer was always the same. No one had seen him. And then the news began to spread like wildfire among the villagers. When the news spread through the village, the biting comments were quick to follow. "See, that's what happens when he doesn't sell him. Now he's lost everything. He was certainly stolen. What a disaster." Lucas lowered his gaze, his eyes moist with helplessness. The pain of having lost the animal burned in his chest. But Arthur, instead of getting angry or responding with rage, remained silent for a few seconds. Then, in a firm but serene voice, he spoke in front of everyone. "If God allowed this to happen, it is because there is a purpose that we do not yet understand. Do not rush your judgment. What seems like a misfortune today may reveal itself as a blessing tomorrow. Who are we to know more than the Creator?" The words of the humble man surprised several. Some fell silent, others frowned and looked at him mockingly. But on Arthur's face, there was no trace of doubt or fear. While the villagers' laughter tried to plant thorns in his heart, he remained serene, like a tree that does not break, even when the wind blows fiercely. "You're a fool, Arthur. You lost the only valuable thing in your life, and you still talk about purposes. What you have is a disaster, and nothing more. Look at him. It seems misery has driven him mad, and your son is sad. You should have sold your mule to the rich man who wanted to buy him days ago. Now you have neither beast nor money." The voices rose with condescension, as if each word intended to humiliate him and make him feel small. And yet, Arthur did not let himself be swept away by the tide of contempt. His calmness was a powerful silence that shouted louder than the mockery, a reminder that true faith does not depend on what you possess, but on the strength of the soul. "Life doesn't always show us its truth right away, my friends," he continued, placing a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "One day we believe we've lost everything, and the next we understand that what we called a loss was actually a disguised gift. Don't view life only by what your eyes can see today. Look with patience, because time is the only one who knows how to separate the good from the bad." Lucas looked at him with amazement. His father spoke with such profound peace that it was impossible not to feel it. And in the midst of his sadness, he began to understand that perhaps his father's calmness was not indifference, but faith. A faith that did not depend on circumstances, but on the trust that nothing happens without reason, that everything happens because the eternal Almighty God allows it, whether good or bad. That same afternoon, Arthur and his son began the journey back to the farm. The sun was setting slowly behind the mountains, painting the path with golden hues. Lucas, with a trembling voice, broke the silence. "Dad, I admire your composure. How do you do it?" Arthur looked at him tenderly and replied with serenity, "Son, everything in this life has a purpose. Although we think things look bad, they often end up for the good. You'll see. Have faith, accept what happens, and above all, be grateful." Hey, are you enjoying this story? I hope so. If you are, please write the phrase, "Everything has a purpose," in the comments. That way, I'll know you're connected to the message. And listen to this. 94.8% of people who watch these videos are still not subscribed. If you are part of that group, I invite you to do it right now. It's free. And that way, you can continue to receive more stories that inspire and transform lives. Remember that at the end of the video, you will find more stories on your screen. Several days of uncertainty passed, until one morning at dawn, as the sun painted the mountains gold, Lucas saw an incredible sight. Blackie was running back, and behind him came several wild mules. The young man ran excitedly. "Dad, look, Blackie is back. And he didn't just come back, he brought us more animals." Hours later, the people of the village learned the news. The whole village went to Arthur's farm to see the spectacle. The same people who had criticized Arthur now said, "How lucky this man is. He is blessed. His poverty will end." But Arthur, without pride or excessive emotion, simply said, "Perhaps the mule went searching for his herd, and now he has returned with it. Let's not call what we don't yet understand fortune." Lucas was overwhelmed with joy, all because of the mule's return. He hugged him around the neck and stroked his mane, as if reuniting with a lost brother. The other mules remained distant because they were wild, but they didn't leave the farm. The young man smiled with hope, convinced that this was a sign from heaven. However, glancing at his father, he noticed that Arthur remained serene, not allowing emotion to dominate him. For Lucas, it was the return of happiness. For Arthur, it was perhaps a new test. The next day, Lucas woke up with a heart overflowing with excitement. As soon as the first light of dawn bathed the fields, he ran to the pasture where Blackie was grazing, accompanied by the new mules. From the fence, he watched them with eyes full of hope, convinced that these animals could bring a new future to the farm. But when he tried to approach, the mules backed away with suspicion. They snorted, stamped their hooves, and watched his every move with apprehension. They didn't accept his voice or his presence. It was as if they had erected an invisible wall between themselves and the boy. Lucas felt a pang of frustration, but seeing Blackie calm, grazing undisturbed, he understood that trust is not earned overnight. If my father trusts that everything has a purpose, I must do the same, he told himself firmly. And at that moment, he made a decision. He would dedicate his time and strength to taming that distrust, to turning those skittish mules into working companions and part of their home. This is how the determination to begin domesticating them was born in him, even if it took him hours, days, and even months of patience. Lucas began training and domesticating the new mules. He spent entire hours in the pasture, approaching patiently, speaking to them in a soft voice, observing every reaction to learn how to gain their trust. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months of hard effort under the sun and rain. Many times he ended up exhausted, with wounded hands and a weary body, but his spirit never broke. Little by little, those animals that initially looked at him with apprehension began to accept his presence, even recognizing him as a worthy companion. But one day, while trying to tame the wildest one, the animal violently threw him. Lucas fell to the ground, and his leg broke. The pain was unbearable, and as if misfortune attracted poisonous tongues, some villagers passing by Arthur's farm saw the situation. They were the same people who had previously scoffed at him when he lost his mule, and they returned to murmur cruelly. "Look, those mules brought bad luck. Now his son is injured." Lucas clenched his teeth, thick tears streaming down his face. "Dad, now don't tell me this isn't bad. Look what happened to me," he said through sobs. Arthur arrived silently, knelt on the ground, and held his leg firmly. His gaze did not waver. In a low voice that seemed to shelter the pain, he replied, "Son, don't say it's bad yet. Time has mysterious ways of showing us its truth." At that very instant, the criticism began like arrows launched against Arthur's heart. "Now what, Arthur? Where is that purpose you talked about when you lost the mule? Look at you, your son is broken on the ground. What kind of blessing is this?" Arthur looked at them without getting upset, with the serenity of one who does not need to defend himself against the noise of the world. His voice was firm but filled with peace. Purpose is not always understood in the moment, nor does pain mean God's absence. Do not call what has not finished revealing itself a disaster. Time will tell if this is a loss or a lesson. Arthur did not argue with anyone. He tore a strip of sackcloth, fashioned a splint with 2 straight branches, and while Lucas gasped for breath, he carefully immobilized his leg and whispered, "Do not curse the pain. Sometimes it is a demanding teacher. If God permitted it, He will also give us the strength to get through it." "But what if I can't work again, Dad?" "Of course you will work again, son. Sometimes God stops us to teach us to walk another way. You don't understand today, but do not rush your judgment. Be grateful for life, even when it hurts. Leave the rest in the hands of the Almighty." The wind combed the pasture like an old hand. The mules watched silently in the distance, and in the midst of the pain, Arthur's voice remained, floating like a promise that needed no proof. The truth of this day was not yet complete. Just 2 weeks after Lucas's incident, the country entered a war. The government began drafting all young men in the country to take them to the battlefield. No one could escape. When the soldiers arrived in the village, they went from farm to farm, recruiting young men. When they reached Arthur's house, they saw Lucas with his broken leg. They could not take him. Meanwhile, many of the other young men were torn from their homes, and sadly, most would never return. Families wept inconsolably. The air in the village filled with lamentations, like a river of pain that could find no outlet. Mothers hugged the empty clothes of their sons. Fathers stared at the horizon with blank eyes, unable to accept the absence. The sound of sobs mixed with the silence of the empty houses, which seemed to cry out for the absence of those who would never return. Those who once mocked Arthur now looked at him with different eyes. The same army that snatched their sons from their arms could not take Lucas, because his broken leg kept him home. And it was then they understood what they had previously scorned. The trial of Arthur and his son, which had seemed like a disaster, had actually been for the good. Amidst their sorrows, they said with choked voices, "We pointed fingers at him, we laughed at his misfortune, but look now, his son lives while ours have gone, and we don't know if they will return." His words were true. Everything that happens is permitted by the Creator, even if it seems unfair at the moment. The silence that followed was not of mockery, but of respect. Many understood that the faith of that humble farmer had seen further than their hasty judgments, and that what seemed like a loss was actually protection. Arthur, with calm eyes and a firm voice, looked at Lucas and said, "Do you see, son? What seemed like a disaster ultimately became salvation. Losing Blackie was hard, but he came back with more. Your leg breaking, it saved you from the war. That's how life is. We never truly know what anything means until time reveals it." Lucas, with tears welling up in his eyes, responded with a lump in his throat. "Dad, now I understand. I regretted the day the mule I was taming threw me, and I broke my leg. I thought everything was over for me, but if it weren't for that pain, I wouldn't be here with you today. My friends were taken, and many won't come back." Arthur placed a hand on his son's shoulder and continued tenderly, yet with a strength that pierced the soul. "Son, that's why I told you not to call something bad that hasn't finished showing itself. The Creator writes with lines that we don't understand at first. He sees further than our eyes and knows more than our heart can bear. Everything He allows with a purpose." Lucas bowed his head, listening, and said softly, "Forgive me, Dad. I doubted your words. I doubted your faith, but now I see you were right. God never abandoned us. He was just guiding us along a path I didn't understand." Arthur hugged him tightly, and with contained tears, whispered in his son's ear, "Never forget this, Lucas. Life is not measured by what we have or what we lose, but by the trust we place in the Creator. What hurts today might save you tomorrow. What seems like a blessing today might test you tomorrow. Therefore, be grateful at all times, because everything has a purpose. At that instant, the silence of the field became solemn. The wind caressed the tree branches, as if confirming those eternal words. And in Lucas's heart, a new faith was born. A faith that no longer depended on what he saw, but on what he learned to trust. I'm so happy that you have reached the end of this video. If this story left you with a lesson, subscribe so you don't miss more life-changing stories. Thank you.